Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to talk about my ghost experiences, part 3. So this all started when I was at my work and I met these two girls. Their names were Victoria and Tiffany. And so, I mean, they seemed pretty cool. So we would always talk at work or have lunch outside of work. And then, so they asked me, you know, one of these times we all have to hang out. I mean, I was down for it. So I was like, okay, yeah, just let me know when. I started hanging out with them outside of work. And I mean, we just did normal things like we went to the mall, to the movies, or we just would hang out and talk at their house. So Tiffany, she was like kind of telling me her backstory. And she told me that she grew up as being a witch. Didn't really, you know, I didn't really ask her questions like what type of witch she was, but she was like telling me that the things that she used to do growing up with her parents like were always like really strange. So I never really questioned it. And so one night, Victoria, she was very quiet and she really liked to party. And so she didn't have anything, a witch or anything like that. But so we all just had different personalities. And so one night they texted me and they're like, oh, you want to come over? Tiffany's like, do you want to come over to my house so we can hang out? And so I was like, sure, why not? So I went over to her house, and then also Victoria was there too. Tiffany is like, have you guys ever played a game called the Ouija? And I've heard of the Ouija board, you know, by like scary movies, or I've seen it at the toy store and that kind of stuff. And I was like, no. And I've always been told, my mom would tell me, stay away from that kind of stuff. 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 In a way, I wish I could have learned my lesson and didn't play with a Ouija board. So I was like on the fence about doing it. I'm like, no. I was like kind of unsure because, you know, a chicken when it comes to scary things. Victoria was like fine doing it. She's like, well, the proper way we have to do it is we have to get candles. In her bedroom, she had kind of like, it was like an open floor plan. In her bedroom, she had like a window. I think she had tile, so it wasn't carpet, because I remember that. At the time she was moving, so the room was basically empty. I mean, I think she had like her blanket and pillow, but pretty much it was just like empty, the room. So they set up the candles, and the way they had the candles was they had one right here and two back there, and then in the middle was the Ouija board. And then the way we were sitting was one person was on one side and the other was on the other side, and then one person in the back. It was almost like a triangle shape, how we had the candles. We had the room completely dark. So she lit the candles, and before we started with the Ouija board, she wanted to do a chant. I didn't really feel comfortable, so I didn't do it. I was like, heck no. My friend Victoria was like, okay, I'll do it. So she did the chanting with her. So I just like kind of watched down. I was like watching them chant. And then so we started. So we all put, I think it was like, I only had like 2 fingers on the little cursor. And so the rest of them had their fingers on the cursor too. After the chant, like she was like calling upon any spirits that were, you know, around the room or in the area, which I was already freaked out. It started moving by itself. So at first I was like, okay, this has to be a joke, you know what I mean? Maybe they're both moving it, because Tiffany and Victoria were there before. So maybe they had this like kind of planned out to freak me out. So they were both, all 3 of us had our fingers on there, and so it started moving. They were asking questions like, are you someone that lives in this area that passed away? And so it moved to yes. I'm like, okay. I really didn't want to believe it at first, but I didn't really have my fingers on there because I was like really scared. I was just like kind of like shocked it was happening. It started going in circles like really fast, and I was like, oh heck no. So what I did was I kind of like stepped back. No, you can't break the circle, you can't break the circle. I was like, I can't do this. This is just too much. Kind of sat in the back of the candles. Victoria and Tiffany continued, and they asked it, what's your name? And then it started going to the H, and it spelled out Harold. And I was like, okay. And they're like, Jonathan, just write this down. So like in my phone, I was like kind of writing down what it was spelling. And so they kept asking it questions like, were you male? And it's like, yes. And they asked how old were you? And I think it put 1957 was the number they were born. they were all asking it, where were you buried at? An address. It basically gave out the numbers. It didn't give out a street. They asked it, were you here in this city? And so it said yes. So then all of a sudden there was just like this burst of like air just went through the room. It just went whoa, like that. And 2 of the candles burnt out. My friend Victoria was like, Jonathan, why are you tapping on my shoulders? Someone was tapping on her shoulders and it wasn't me. I was already almost outside the door. I was like, forget this, I'm done. So then my friend Tiffany, she just like felt really weak afterwards and she was like kind of sick and she was like, you know what, I think I'm done, you guys, for tonight. And so we all went home and then Tiffany was like texting me. She's like, hey, would you be down to go to the address that it gave? And at first I was like, no, I don't want anything bad to happen to me. And she's like, no, you'll be fine. You don't have to participate in the stuff we're doing. We called Victoria and Victoria, of course, she said yes to it. The address we typed in was actually a cemetery. I was like really freaked out. So we drove to the cemetery and the cemetery was really like old fashioned. It had basically, you know, like most cemeteries just have the tombstones flat. These are like actual tombstones that were there in the like 1900s. They basically didn't want to go during the day, so it was at night, and they convinced me to go at midnight. I was like, okay, so we all met at the cemetery. They basically brought out, I told them that I was not gonna leave the car. Like there's no way in heck I was gonna go inside the cemetery at night and just, you know, basically do this Ouija board. And I mean, it would be really hard to like narrow it down because there's so many people there. You know, we didn't have a last name. And so basically she's like, okay, we can just do it outside the car. They were doing the Ouija board outside the car. And of course I was inside the car with the door closed and locked. And they started doing the Ouija board and then next thing you know it, I hear like this, it almost sounded like a bat, like the screeching noise. Like it was something I've never heard in my whole entire life. It was like making this screeching noises. And then my friend saw an owl, which I know owls are really rare to see. I know it was like so intense that we had to leave. It was just like freaking scary. Even though I was in the car, like all this stuff is happening and I could hear it, but I was basically, you know, I'm like, I'm done. Let's get out of here. So after that happened, some strange things started happening. In my house, my brother had this psychotic episode and just like all kinds of bad stuff started happening left and right. Like I remember my mom's tire all of a sudden just went flat. And then Tiffany, she started getting sick and then she was just not herself. I guess Tiffany and Victoria hung out one time and Victoria was telling me that she noticed like Tiffany wasn't herself and she was just like always angry, and then she kind of got into this depression. And she told me one night they were talking and she swears on air that she saw Tiffany's eyes turn all the way black. I wasn't there, but just like hearing about it just like freaked me out. And so Victoria also, she was dealing with the same thing, like a lot of anger built up. After all that happened, I just like kind of kept my distance away from them. I was experiencing my own stuff. Like it was hard for me to sleep. I was having these bad dreams and just like hearing things at my house, and I was just like kind of freaked out. After that happened, I learned my lesson never to play with the Ouija board. I would never put my hands on one ever again. And to this day, I haven't really talked to both of them, so I don't know what really happened. I mean, hopefully it's the best for them. I just like had to separate myself from them. Thank you for watching my video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you the next time for the next ghost story. Then, bye.